Welcome everyone to Global Accessibility Awareness Day. This is an annual event in which we all get to think a little bit more about making the world more accessible. It's also a really great opportunity if you're new to digital accessibility, don't understand what it means, or it's curious, or if you're struggling to make it happen in your organization. There's events going on all day around the world online where you can learn more about it. And I am Lynn Wehrman, President and Founder of Digital Accessibility by WeCo, and we are sponsoring today's event, Achieving Digital Accessibility with a Global Team. A little bit more about us. Digital Accessibility by WeCo is a company that was founded and is run entirely by digital accessibility professionals who live with disabilities. And our mission is to put you in touch with subject matter experts who live with disabilities and understand how to convey our accessibility needs to you. We are members of the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, and we believe we bring much relevance to the industry because simulations cannot replace human experience. So I'd like to introduce you to Paul Day, who is going to be our panel moderator. Paul is a lead accessibility specialist for Visa Corporation, and Paul started out his accessibility career at WeCo as one of our certified test consultants. And we will be turning that over to Paul shortly. But first, I would like to introduce our panelists. First of all, we have Ryan Huffman, who is Manager of Digital Design Development and Accessibility at General Mills. Welcome, Ryan. Then we have Akuso or Cozy Acerber. Am I pronouncing that right?
It's close.
Okay. Would you pronounce it for me?
I just go by am I on mute? No.
Nope.
Okay. I just go by Cozy.
All right, Cozy. Cozy is the head of accessibility at Desert Wing Design, LLC. Welcome, Cozy. And Graham Venning, the founder of Desert Wing, LLC. Welcome, Graham.
Thank you, Lynn.
And Gerson Lacado, freelance accessible WordPress web developer and manager, who's working on projects with Desert Wing as well. We're happy to have you with us, Gerson.
Okay.
So without further ado, we will turn this panel over to Paul.
Thank you, Lynn. And again, thank you to the panelists for joining us today. We're going to do our best to have a great, open, and honest, free conversation today with a little bit of guidance from myself and a lot of cool stories from you guys. So to kick us off, I want you guys to sort of give us a little bit of your background, share with us your background in accessibility. And I'll have lucky person start first will be Gerson. How about giving us a little bit of your background in accessibility?
Oh, excuse me, guys. Sorry, Gerson. This is Lynn. I realized that I missed one of our panelists. We also have Sue-Ann Rodriguez, who is the Director of Accessibility Services here at WeCo. Sorry about that. I'll let you take over.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Gerson, and I work with Graham and Cozy, Desert Wing as a developer. So I first encountered web accessibility firsthand a little over 2 years ago during the pandemic. I watched this interview about web accessibility on YouTube, and shortly thereafter, I searched for an online course on accessibility because I got interested. And I found this really great course on Introduction to Web Accessibility from edX, and it was a perfect intro course for me. because I got to know the overview of web accessibility, and I got introduced to people with disabilities and how they browse the web. And it also made me realize a lot of significant things, specifically that I unknowingly contribute to the frustrations of people with disabilities because of how I used to create websites. And so even before I finished the course, I've already made up my mind that I would now make sure that the websites I create are accessible. So that's how I got started with accessibility.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being able to, determine that and have enough self-reflection to make that determination. That's not easy for a lot of people, especially in the creative space, developer, designer space, to recognize that. So I want to thank you for that. Let's kick it over. Ryan, you're up next. Give us a little bit about your background in accessibility, if you can.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here. Great to see everybody. Again, my name is Ryan Huffman. I'm the manager of design development and accessibility at General Mills. My experience with accessibility dates back to when I was about, I would say, 5 years old. I grew up in a household where my mom was a physical therapist who specialized in working with children born with physical disabilities. At that time, my mom married a man who was born with a condition called spina bifida, which affects about 1 in 1,000 babies, where it affects the development of a spinal cord. So my stepfather was a wheelchair user his entire life. He went on to become a professor of special education at the University of Iowa and was an advocate for accessibility his entire life. So growing up in a household where there was a focus on people with disabilities, I think I had a kind of a unique perspective at an early age, which I've carried with me throughout my career.
Awesome. Sue-Ann, how about giving us a little bit about your background in accessibility?
Yes. So hello, everybody. My name is Sue-Ann, as Paul just mentioned. I'm the director of the access team here at WeCo. My journey into or regarding accessibility started unbeknownst to me in my personal life when I started to use the computers and go on websites. I am blind and use a screen reader, but I also do, on a side note, I do have a speech impediment as well. But so when on the computer, I encountered accessibility issues without even really realizing it in my personal life. But when I started to have it as a career, I was attending graduate college, and one of the graduate courses I was taking was in usability testing, and there was a project that my instructor wanted me to be a part of, which was at the time, way back when, was text-based or text-only websites. And so she wanted me to be a part of that particular user test group. So I really flourished in that project because I am blind and I use a screen reader, so I was able to provide a lot of advice and knowledge to the group and to the project. So after that, a former student that was a friend of mine, she asked me to do a usability test for her, the company that she worked for. So I said, sure. And because at the time I was trying to look for a job, and she's like, afterwards, she's like, Sue-Ann, there's a lot of companies out there that do usability testing that would find you to be a great, asset for their projects. So then I took it upon myself to do a search, go on Google to do a search for accessibility testing related jobs. And that's when I happened to come up upon WeCo. And as they say, the rest is history, because here I am.
Awesome. Great history. The honor to work with Sue-Ann, so I can vouch for that. Graham, you're up next.
Thank you, Paul. I'm Graham Venning, and I'm the founder of Desert Wing Design. That came about actually because I had worked actually in a different field altogether, and I had a seizure, and I could no longer drive or climb on roofs. I was a handyman, and one of my clients knew that I was able to do some sort of IT things as well, and she asked if I could help with updating their WordPress website, and that was actually 5 years ago. So for the first sort of 2.5 years of that, I thought that I understood a little bit about what web design was, until a client approached me, or a prospect at the time, asking me to help them with a new non-profit site that they wanted to make accessible. And that was really my sort of first sort of like awakening into this term website accessibility. And so that site took the best part of a year, and I had to learn a lot, but also bring in experts, because I just didn't know what I needed to know to confidently deliver the site. And then last year I was invited actually by Jerson, who's with us now. He had 3 others that were making up a team to enter the Nobilities Accessibility Internet Rally competition that they've hosted for 24 years now. This will be the 25th year. And so we took part in that. And so we joined as a team of 4, and then Kosi, who's with us today, joined us as well, and one other, Deneb, and that made the 6th of us that made up that team. And we had the privilege of working with a non-profit who was allocated to us to build them an accessible site that was then judged. And we were really, we got on so wonderfully as a team that I think that made a huge difference. And we ended up actually winning that competition. So that made it possible for us to go last week to Texas and do a presentation about what we learned from doing that, sort of participating in that. And so I'm sort of just back from that, back here in Tucson, Arizona. And that's just a little bit about my journey, and really glad to be here today.
Awesome, thank you, Graham. Yeah, I saw your presentation on the agenda there. I'm gonna have to catch the recording of it, so I am definitely looking forward to that, especially now that I know the people that are behind that presentation. So thanks for being there. Cozy, last but not least, can you share a bit about your background in accessibility?
Sure. My name is I'm gonna try that again. My name is Kosi Asabre, and I will say, for the first time, I can say I'm not the only person here with a speech impediment, so that's amazing. Yes, I do have a speech impediment, and I have had one since I could speak. With that said, I will share a little bit about myself. I am a digital accessibility I'm a consultant and also the head of accessibility at Desert Wing Design. So I've been in the accessibility space for about 10 years now. I worked as accessibility trying to say the word. I have worked as a in the space, and then I also worked as an accessibility manager for the Lighthouse for the Blind, Incorporated. So this is I love the work that I do. It's a professional thing, but it's also a personal thing for me as well. I remember one time I was in college in my freshman year, and I had a friend that had a roommate, and I went to her dorm room, and there was a big screen that kind of took up a lot of the space. it had like, it was a CCTT-V, and that was my first real exposure to assistive technology. Her roommate was blind, and I remember her, going to the bus stop and trying to find it with her cane. So she was tapping along the curb, and I remember being in awe, kind of shocked, a little like confused, but I was ignorant back then. And so it's funny to me because I never would have imagined that in a million years, a few years later, that would be me. So that's the thing about disability. You could be removed from it one day, and then the next day be a part of this group. Fast forward, I've worked with 300 different people with different types of disabilities. I've trained them on assistive tech. So that really informs the work I do now and how I guide teams to incorporate inclusive design best practices. I will also say, if you have an idea of what I might be saying, feel free to guess. I love that. That's not something that all people love, but I happen to like that quite a bit. So feel free to guess if I'm a little stuck on a word.
Okay, thanks for that. Well, you guys are all amazing. Let me just start out by saying that you guys bring a different range of entry points into the world of accessibility, which is the main reason why we have you here on this panel. You guys are going to be able to shed light on a lot of different aspects of it for us. So with saying that, I want to jump into sort of the theme here, accessibility across a global team. And that could be global speaking in the sense of other countries, in the sense of other time zones, date lines. So I'm going to start out first with Ryan. What are some of the challenges? And I might start with Ryan, but I want you all to think about this as well. And when Ryan's answering, you guys have any points to jump in, feel free. But I'm going to get you guys answers as well. What are some of the challenges you have faced working with teams across different time zones or different regions?
Sure, Paul, thanks for the question. I'm going to keep the question specific to time zones. I think maybe I'll hold off on cultural differences, but with respect to working with time zones, so let me kind of provide a little bit of context of my role and my accountability. So with my role of manager of design and development and accessibility, I oversee the design of output on about 5, now 6 website product teams that are all international. So at General Mills, we are responsible for over 300 websites under General Mills, and those are spread across multiple product teams based on the platforms that they are supported by. The design teams could be based all over the world. The development teams could be based all over the world. There's many challenges when it comes to accessibility on those projects. I think because of the size of our organization, everybody is at a different place with the accessibility journey. Some are much further along than others. So you have to kind of meet people where they're at, and you kind of have to be able to provide the support that they need. So sometimes you need to start with just basic education of what accessibility is and what it means, and then introduce them to different ways that people access content so that they can kind of understand what you're talking about and that it's not so abstract. When you then kind of get into the deliverables, I think the challenge is that when you don't have as close a collaboration between design and development, you need better communication, because you don't have the freedom or the flexibility to engage at will. So you need to think about those deliverables, those annotations, kind of guiding the design and development process kind of end to end through that project, I think
Right.
requires a lot of time and effort. But what we typically recommend is we focus on 4 key phases of engagement. One is, let's be part of the planning process. Let's identify all of the requirements that are required as part of a project so that we understand what those deliverables need to be. And then we can kind of assess like where, what accessibility testing or other assessments need to be included as part of that process. So first is the requirements gathering. Then when we actually kick off the project, we want to have time to look at the internal review process, be part of that internal review process. So typically there's a static layout that's provided, probably in some sort of PDF format. So at that time, we will do an internal review with the core team that's creating those deliverables. We also partner closely with WeCo to get their feedback on those designs. And then once we've kind of provide that design feedback and we've made the required changes and it can be moved into development, we have a couple of approaches we can take. One is some teams operate under an agile methodology, which is every 2 weeks they are working on deliverables. And at the end of the 2 weeks, there's some sort of output that can be reviewed. Typically, there's like a digital application that can be tested against. In a waterfall method, all that design work is handed off in one big chunk, and then you won't have access to the application until it's basically ready for QA. So that next phase of engagement is that digital application review. So at that time, we're doing a manual assessment, we're doing code inspections, we're doing another visual design inspection, we're doing keyboard testing, screen reader testing, those types of things. And then the next phase or last phase that we want to be engaged in is that post-authoring process. When the content has all been added to the website, we're reviewing the images, the alt text, the link names, the button names, but we're doing a final visual assessment, again, code inspection, all those tests that we did before, we're rechecking again. And there may be issues that come out of that. And as part of that kind of review process, we work with WeCo to determine which issues are critical and those need to be addressed first, and which ones need to be addressed prior to launch, and if there are any issues that can be remediated post-launch. So that's kind of our process, but I think working globally, it poses unique challenges based on what team you're working with, but the overall process is the same. I would just say the further apart you are in terms of locale and the less flexibility you have in terms of collaboration, you need to focus more on communication, annotation, and those deliverables.
Right, that makes sense. And before I move on to, I'm going to come to you next, Sue-Ann. Do you find that it's important when you do that handoff in, let's say, the waterfall method, when you're handing off the design to dev, do you find it very important to sort of have clear language of like what exactly that design is meant to do? Like, do you find that helps or can hinder the process?
I think in terms of how that wants to be received, you need to understand from their perspective what's going to benefit them, right? And so I think that's just something you need to align on and what's going to be most helpful for them. Sometimes there's questions around like language and translation, and something can mean something in the United States, it can mean something different in India. And we kind of need to talk through some of those scenarios of like, well, this is how we would approach it here. Maybe there are different cultural norms that we need to be aware of in India. So whenever there are kind of those barriers or those situations, it's best just to listen, ask as many questions as you can to understand from their perspective versus kind of forcing your opinion or input on someone.
Awesome. Thank you for that insight. All right. Sue-Ann, what about you? Have you faced any challenges with working with teams across different time zones and other areas?
Yes, I would say, first of all, with regards to the time zones, a challenge that I would say that we have faced, I would say, for me as the director of the access team, I'm the one who is primarily the one that schedules different meetings for the team and with our clients. And so what a challenge to me was when I first started, I didn't have to be concerned about different time zones, but as we got, a client or two that it was in a different time zone in general, I needed to brush up on the different time zones and how they work in comparison to the central time zone where I'm at. And so for me, that was a challenge just on my own to try to figure that out. It didn't take me that long, but I still have challenges here and there. But what other challenge that I would also say that would be to try to schedule meeting with individuals who are in different time zones. Like we had a meeting I was trying to schedule with a person that was in the Central Standard Time Zone and an Eastern Time Zone, scheduled them a meeting with a client who was in Europe, and I forgot how many 6 hours or 7 hours they're behind the Central Time Zone. So that's the challenge. Just scheduling meetings. Now we're not as I don't have to schedule big meetings like Ryan does, but I think the other challenge is to be flexible with the time that we make available to our clients so that it can fit, be more accommodating to what their time zone is in regards to when their work day is. And I recall there was a couple times where I was meeting with a client at 7 o'clock at night Central Time, and then also a couple of times on the weekends. So I think in regards to time zones, I think those are the challenges that I can recall.
Awesome. Thank you. Graham, Cozy, or Jerson, did you guys want to add to that? And any challenges that you guys might have faced?
Sure.
Okay. Take it away, Cozy.
Oh, hi. Yes. So I'm thinking about the competition, the competition that we worked on over about 10 weeks or so. There was quite a time zone gap. So we had somebody who was in California, and then there, Graham, myself, and another team. I guess Graham was like Central. No, I think Mountain. I'm getting it wrong.
Mountain time, yeah.
But for the most part, we had someone on the West Coast, and then we had other team members who were in the Philippines. Yes. So for me, it was about 12 hours. So anytime, so if I had, say if I had a meeting at 8 a.m. for somebody in the Philippines, that was 8 p.m. So it was just quite a gap. And if my time was 7, if I was 8 a.m., then someone on the West Coast had to join at 5 a.m. So that was a balancing act. And Graham can tell you more about how we made that work.
Well, it was quite a challenge. I mean, to begin with, we didn't we'd never worked together as a team. Nobility, who are organizing this accessibility internet rally, take those people that have submitted who've applied, and then they put them into teams. And so our client, who was then given to us after that fact, was also on the far west coast in sort of northwest corner of America here. And so for her meeting with us, it was typically an hour earlier. And then from meeting with the team in the Philippines that made up Jerson and Patrick and Kat, who was our designer, that was a 15-hour time zone difference from pretty much my time. So we ended up having to figure out how we could make that happen. And it really required not following any standard hours. We could never meet during normal working hours. So we had to either start really early in the morning here, and typically we did that. It would be 6 or 7 a.m. here and 10 PM in the Philippines. And that's how we did it every single time. And we met twice a week with the client, and well, once with the client and once without the client. And that was just the way that we figured it out. We simply couldn't do it really any other way. You know, that sort of hopefully explains a little bit more as to how it was possible. But
Yeah, definitely.
yeah.
Did you guys tend to rely heavily on collaboration tools? If so, what kind of collaboration tools did you use, and what did you find worked better than others? Like,
well, yes, I mean, we found that Slack was the best tool for us internally, but our client, the nonprofit, we communicated via email with them, and so in my case, I was communicating primarily with the client, and then sharing that with the team, and then we would meet on Zoom calls together. But actually, we had a really interesting experience on the project management side. So one of the team was a dedicated project manager, and that's required for the competition. And Patrick, who was in the Philippines, had a couple of tools that he was recommending. But Kosi, you actually came up with a new one that none of us had really heard of before. Do you want to tell us anything about that one?
Sure. So we decided to go with a tool called Backlog. It was the most accessible of all of the PM tools I've worked with. So I think the original plan was to go with ClickUp, but and they kind of I know Graham and some of the other team was ready to go with ClickUp. So just finding ways to tell the team, wait, there's someone on here, on this team that has a disability. So we have to kind of vet all of the tools that we work with. So that was, I wouldn't say that was a cultural, that wasn't like a difference, that was a cultural one. I think just people in general weren't used to having somebody on the actual team who needed any kind of accommodation. So that was another piece that we had to work with on this remote team.
that is a great point, and we're going to touch a little bit more on that during this panel as well, which, as you know, anyone working in this field knows that you're going to have people with disabilities that are also going to be there, and sometimes the thing that gets in the way is the tools that companies choose to use to do business. I'm not going to name any particular tools out here, but we've all probably encountered those and those barriers that those can pose for us. Jerson, before I move on, did you have anything to add to that? I know you guys are all on the same team. Did your teammates cover it all, or did you have anything else outside of that you might want to add? If not, we can move it on.
I think Graham covered most of it. For me, the experience was that there's not a lot of adjustment on my side because I'm so used to working with clients in the US. And just for context, I live in the Philippines. So I've been doing this for about 10 years now. So the adjustment isn't really that significant for me because I'm so used to working at nights and with different clients across different time zones. But I think the biggest struggle for me was for meetings on different times. Like if it's, for example, something like this hour, it started around 4 o'clock on my time. So I had to pre-schedule my my activities. So if I have something like this, I would have to break my usual cycle and sleep earlier than usual and wake up early and then do the meeting and just readjust everything else to fit the schedule.
Right, that can be very tough. I remember when I had to come in early because our devs were in India and at my other position before here, and get there at 7 o'clock in the morning, which is very different from my daily schedule, 2-hour commute into the office. So leaving the house at 5 a.m. to get for 7 a.m. meeting because you have an important project. That can be very, very tough. Now, I want to ask you guys, have you guys encountered any cultural differences that have like impacted how you approach an accessibility issue, or let's say like an accessibility solution that you're trying to get through. And that accessibility solution could be something like what happened with Cozy, with the tools that your team was going to use, or an accessibility solution or issue for a client or a company that you are working for. And Jerson, I'm gonna stick with you for this one and throw that at you first, and then anybody else can sort of add on after that if you like. Now I'll call out somebody else, but Jerson, you want to take that one first?
In terms of working with clients, the experience is that because I came into web accessibility fairly recently, and the thing that I've observed is that well, at least here in my country, the focus on accessibility, or particularly digital accessibility, is almost non-existent, or at least it's not given a lot of attention. And so I came into accessibility learning about other countries' laws and implementations, and working with teams that are already doing accessibility. So that's how I kind of got into accessibility. And so right now I'm trying to share the idea and the concept and the different skills and knowledge about accessibility that I've learned over the 2 years that I'm into accessibility, and sharing it with my fellow freelancers and web professionals here in the Philippines. So, but in terms of working, there's not really a lot of things that I've encountered that would impact the work that I do based on culture.
Yeah, perfect. That answer was actually pretty good, because you actually went back and sort of touched on the point of sort of educating the other people around you to the importance of accessibility. So that's awesome. Sue-Ann, do you want to take a stab at this? Have you encountered any cultural differences that might impact, an approach to an accessibility solution or issue that you've worked on during your career?
So I would have to say, and this is pre me coming to WeCo, and a bit in my early days at WeCo, but I wasn't really involved that much. So, but I know that our president of the company had mentioned, and I kind of experienced this in my personal life too, but the overall impression or idea about individuals who are disabled, the idea or the impression was that, they cannot be looked at as a subject matter expert, and they would be quote unquote offered like some type of gift card to do a usability test, so something like that. But since I've gone into the director role and have become more involved, and as time has went on, that really has changed. So a few examples. So when I am scheduling meetings with clients, sometimes they say, oh, can we meet on Teams? And I'm like, well, I said, if it's okay with you, we prefer to meet on Zoom. It's more accessible, et cetera, et cetera. And clients are really open to, okay, that's great. Anything to help you do your presentation or have a meeting with us. Clients are really open to being flexible with us about things like that. And then one other example I would like to give is that a client of ours asked us to do a screen reader focus type of accessibility test for a partner company of theirs. And so we did a screen reader test, and we came up with some issues. I can't recall exactly what they were in particular, but there was one issue where the partner company came back and gave us, I would say, like a little pushback, like saying, well, are you sure this took place? Or are you sure this is an accessibility issue? And the client was like, nope. This person who did this screen reader test, basically we support the results because they are, quote unquote, the subject matter experts. And I would like to say that I would say, I'd say like the past, 3 years, I would say, we really, as far as WeCo, and from my perspective, have come into a new realm, I would say, in that now we are, to me, we are considered subject matter experts as clients and other individuals come to us for our services and to participate at different events.
Awesome. Graham, you want to, do you have anything to add to that question? Any cultural difference that, have impacted how you approach an accessibility issue or solution? And cultural could be, regional, could be country, it could be company based, right? Each company has their own culture, right? So,
yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I moved from England 11 years ago to America, to the US here, and I've had to sort of adjust to the US culture. Actually, we speak English, but there's actually some significant differences. So, and if I've experienced it in that regard, it's no surprise that there are many others out there that impact us, from an accessibility standpoint. I wouldn't say that I've had many, and my main sort of reference is the last year since we started the AIR project for that competition, because I hadn't worked with anyone from an accessibility on a project that was accessibility focused. And we were really fortunate because we had such great communications. Everyone spoke English really well and wrote English really well, and we didn't have to try and translate, and those sorts of things would have really made a difference. So I think we had it easy. But one of the things I would say is that generationally, I would say there was a difference. And I'm a Gen X, which means I'm somewhere between 43 and 50, mid 50s. So you can choose. Hopefully, you'll all choose the early end of that age range. But I noticed that, I'm much more prone to more traditional methods of communication like email versus jumping in and out of numerous other products like Slack or the project management tool, which was a new one for all of us. So yeah, maybe I'm old school, but that was a generational issue. I noticed all the younger members of the team were much better than I was at jumping in and out of all of these new tools and embracing the new technology. So kudos to them. They helped keep me on track, which was great.
Right, and that's awesome. That's something that other people might not think about as well, is the generation gap while you're working on these teams, and when you're trying to push solutions as well. The younger generation might have, well, let's promote this out there on TikTok or something like that, and owner marketing is like, oh, what? Like, we need press releases, we need this and that. So, and then throw accessibility or on top of that, then you're throwing like another like wrench into the gears, right? Cozy, do you have anything that you want to add to this? Have you had any experience throughout your story career?
Sure. So there's a couple of instances that I can think of, but for the purposes, of the time we have, I think I'm going to focus on my experience working with a development team located in Ghana, West Africa. So a little bit of background. That's where my family is from. They are from Ghana, and they somebody reached out to me and they wanted to develop it was a website for a healthcare for facility. So they knew about accessibility, but it was still a concept that's relatively new. And I'm trying to think of a way to say this. It's accessibility is something that is newer. And my observation is that in places where the infrastructure is, there's not a lot of infrastructure, disability and the idea of
Accessibility.
right is further down that priority list.
Right.
And we can talk about why that is. I mean, the way even my family to some extent might think about disability or how they thought about it in the past. It's like a societal thing. It's a cultural thing. There is a stigma, like in many other parts of the world. So if you have a disability, you're probably either revered, and maybe it's something that is almost like a
Supernatural.
right, or it's a curse or like an abomination or something of that sort. So sometimes people are like hid away. Family is left to care for the individual with a disability. There's not a lot. So what I'm trying to say is, me in the United States, trying to train a team to make accessibility a priority, there's going to be a few more steps, a few more hoops I might have to jump through. So the way I tend to break through is pretty much, I do a lot of demonstrations, real time, work with whether it's screen readers, magnification, braille displays, text to speech, speech to text. I want people to understand that I'm a person and people with disabilities are real people, and we're just like we're just like we're just like the rest of us. So I think that's when would really break through. So there's the education piece that is really huge, and I find that really does kind of allow that break. I've seen it time and time again, and that really helps. So it's not like people don't care about accessibility; they just don't understand that people will want to do what everybody else does. We want to surf the web. We want to buy things. We want to watch shows and movies. We want to attend. So that I feel like that it was a learning curve, but I do think at the end of the day, they saw me as somebody who they could relate to, and that kind of helped crack that,
Perfect.
crack that mold. Yeah.
Yeah, that is true, and that's sometimes the way to sort of break that barrier, right? And with that being said, now I want to ask this question to the panel. How did you guys in your various meetings or interactions find disability or people with disabilities generally discussed in meetings by the decision makers? Graham, do you have any insight into that? Like, have you been, I know like you said it's been a year or two, how are people with disabilities discussed in the circles that you are in?
Well, predominantly, all those that I'm in contact with are really very much proponents for increasing accessibility. But what I've noticed, I've had a couple of conversations with prospects, people that may be interested in having a new website built, and the blocker often it's the biggest one that really stood out to me was prospect who didn't want me to enhance their accessibility. They had an old site, and because they felt that it would actually bring more people who have some kind of disability through their doors, and it would increase their costs to have to provide an interpreter, for instance, or a sign language, person who could actually help with communication. And it was just such a shock to me to actually be on the receiving end of that kind of negative thinking. I don't think it was just driven by cost. I think it was the person who was saying that, was very left a lot to be desired. So thankfully, I don't come across that, and that's a real rarity. But that certainly stood out for me, and but I'm so glad that I don't come across that often.
So, did you try to sort of educate that person when that happened, or how did you handle that situation when that occurred?
I sort of nodded at him in the moment, and I didn't want to cause a lot of confrontation. I didn't want to sort of, it was really difficult. I felt very uncomfortable, and I felt like the conversation wasn't going in the right direction. So once that meeting came to an end, I mean, it was the last time I actually spoke with them about any potential work. So
wow,
that was a great red flag to get at the beginning, because I would have discovered that later on.
Yes, but very important. Yeah, awesome. I know you touched on it a bit, Jerson. Do you feel that you sort of covered that, like how people with disabilities are discussed in the meetings or amongst your freelance peers? Did you want to add anything more to that, or do you feel that you answered it in the other question? I'll give you the opportunity.
Sure. So my experience when I was first starting to introduce accessibility to my work, and I bring it up with my clients or prospects in meetings. Well, unsurprisingly, they seem to not even factor or consider people with disabilities in the equation. Like when I tell them that we have to make your website accessible to allow other people, so people with disabilities to be able to use your sites as well, and they didn't even consider that people with disabilities also use their websites. So I think that's one of the biggest that I've encountered in terms of decision makers not being able to initially adapt to the idea of having people with disabilities going to their site. So the thing that I would do is to just cite some examples and a little bit of education, I guess, on what I've learned so far, and just eventually letting them decide on whether they would invest further into the development of the website, because that's for them another sort of blocker in accepting into incorporating web accessibility to the website. But as I've learned over the years, I kind of able to bring a lot more light into accessibility through different means, as I've learned through other people that I interact with in the accessibility space. So I've learned a lot from my teammates in the AIR competition, like Kosi, who provided us a lot of insight and firsthand experience in dealing with websites.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that speaks back to Kosi's point, where people aren't taking into consideration that people with disabilities use their products. It's sort of like in a lot of cultures, countries, societies, people with disabilities are hidden away, right? We're not expected to sort of be out in the world when I think there's about $2.2 billion worth of people with disabilities money that's available out there, and if people can realize that and tap into that lucrative market that's just waiting to, you know, spend some currency, you know, sometimes we have to sort of bring that to the forefront. So depending on who you're talking to can also depend on how you sort of like approach that problem, right? Or how you educate them, whether you're talking to people that are legal, people that are marketers. Ryan, I want to definitely get your take on that as well. How did you find, or how do you find people with disabilities are discussed in meetings by decision makers? Being that,
Yeah, I'm in a lot of those
global
meetings. Yeah, I'm in a lot of those meetings. I have those conversations multiple times a day, I feel like, and it feels a little bit repetitive, but I know that we're building awareness with each conversation, so I think that's good. I think a company of our size, in like other companies of our size, we are a very data-driven organization. And you often get asked for data about your users, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we want to provide a lot of data for our users, but we also know that the disability community doesn't want to be categorized or put into data, right? And segmented into those groups. So you have to have those conversations. Essentially, what we're being asked is the effort going to be, is there going to be a return on this effort, right, that we put into this application?
ROI, yeah, return on investment. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I need to think about what the team I'm speaking with needs, right? And so my approach will shift depending on the audience. And I'll take a few different approaches. And I think Kosi touched on this. I think Jerson touched on this, which is you can always take the legal route. And sometimes that is the approach I take. But for marketers, I try to provide the benefits that we are extending our market reach. And you touched on this too, Paul, that, you know, we know that about 20% of the US population has a recognized disability, and, you know, 25% even in the US and 20% globally. So if we can get, you know, 25% more users on our applications and buying our products, that's going to drop to the bottom line, right? And that's going to be good for the organization. But we also talk about, you know, having languages or having applications in multiple languages to say, like, are you aware that of all the languages of the population within this region or country, right? And are we making sure that the content is being delivered in all of those languages? And so we talk a lot about multilingual support, in addition to extending that market reach and the SEO value that can provide, right? And so if your application is search friendly, it's going to be SEO friendly. So there's different approaches we can take. It really depends on the audience and what they need. I think once people kind of understand all of those benefits and, you know, and not just like the legal compliance side of it, it's easy to get that buy-in, and then people get excited about it. You know, for our team, what we're passionate about is that it's a way that we can evaluate design work and development work. And I think, you know, we're seeing it with this team here that they take pride in the work and winning that award, which is a great accomplishment. And that all just goes down to the quality of the work that they put into it. So that's what we're passionate about. We love building innovative, flexible, robust applications that just happen to be, you know, accessible. So
that is awesome. I sort of call that you know, my bag of tricks or my toolbox, right? You sit down, you sort of assess who you're going to be speaking with that day and sort of identify what their driver is, like what makes them tick, and tailor your speech to them. So whether it's legal, you talk about compliance, you talk about whatever, although it might not be your main sort of goal, right? Like, you know, you care less about that because, you know, you just want to make it accessible for people, but you know, that's what's going to make legal sign off on it. So sometimes you just have to play the game. but yeah, it could be a tight a tightrope walk.
Yeah. I definitely have a hidden agenda when I go into those meetings. You know, a lot of people think introductions are a waste of time, but I'll go in knowing what the agenda is, and then I will do those introductions to understand who my audience is, and then I will then tailor my pitch based on who I'm speaking to, right? So if I've got a marketer there, it's going to be about extending that market reach and driving e-commerce. If I've got an analyst in there, I'm going to talk about data and other metrics. So
awesome, smart. Good job, awesome. Sue Ann, do you want to add anything to
Yes,
that? Yeah.
yes. So I'm in a unique situation where I interact with the client once they have purchased different services from us. So I'm not in the unique position about, you know, trying to get a potential client to purchase our services, so I can't speak to that, but I can speak to once we do have clients, there are different reasons why clients come to us. You know, some are for legal reasons, and what we have found, not often anymore, but sometimes we get the client where, okay, we do a particular test for them, and a particular test includes us going back to confirm that the issues that we identified, that they've actually been fixed, and not just told to us that they've been fixed. And some clients, you know, we don't ever hear back from them in that sense. But what I would like to say, so we've also been fortunate, I and my team members, we've never had to deal with a client or an attendee of a training or a webinar, you know, say anything negative or anything about us having a disability or anything like that. But I will say is regarding accessibility and our clients is that, you know, they are really impressed and always inform us that they got a lot out of the report results that we provide them with. They relate to us that they're really detailed, and kind of helps open their eyes to accessibility as far as, well, oh, well, that makes sense. If you can't go to the navigation menu with a keyboard, well, you know, if you use a keyboard, then you're just out of look at that point to be able to interact with that website in that manner. But what really helped us really open people's, you know, perspectives, I guess what you would say, is that having us do our consultations with our clients where we go over the reports, we explain to them, we show them an example. Also, what we call our Q&A meetings, where the client will ask us to go to a website and test something with the screen reader. They can see and hear firsthand how that screen reader interacting with them. And it really just helps to bring more of awareness, just like Ryan had said, awareness to accessibility, the issues, and how it really does impact real users. I like to equate this as, you know, when you hear something bad that happened to somebody on the news, and you're like, oh, you know, that's too bad that person, you know, someone broke into their car or something like that, and you're like, oh, I feel bad for them. But when it happens to you firsthand, it really changes your perspective about things like that.
That's a great analogy. That's awesome. Now I'm going to actually follow up now, without revealing anything that's, you know, proprietary or, you know, sensitive. When you're in those client meetings, or like, do you usually see yourself there with dev, design, product managers, a mixture of both, and or all three? And who tends to be the most receptive to your feedback, and then who tends to be the most resistant to the feedback?
Okay, that's a really good question. And so we get a mixture. We get project managers, developers, somebody who's in marketing, just depending on what kind of client we have, whether it be a company, a nonprofit, etc. And I would say it's dependent on the ones that we get, like who are like quote unquote more resistant. For example, we had a client a while back ago, and they were they were trying to meet some particular legal requirements. And so we really got a lot of resistance or pushback from them by saying, are you sure this is an accessibility issue? Because here's what the WCAG, 2.1 success criterion says. So it all just depends on who the actual person is in there, like what position role that they're playing, and what the actual reason for that they get having a accessibility test of some kind. And I would say honestly though, all of our clients that I'm aware of, except for a few, have really been receptive and open to all of our feedback because it's detailed, validated, and there's not much that you can get resistance from based upon the results that we present them with. And we even give an opportunity to ask us during our consultations with the client, is there anything that you want us to go over? Did you want us to go to this page and show you or demonstrate the issue where this occurred? So yes.
That's awesome. So it seems like WeCo is sort of eliminating some of the friction points by being very thorough and being open and demonstrating a lot, sort of bring them into the world of the person with the disability that is testing their product for them.
Yes, and I would also, yes, and I'd also just like to say that we do give them opportunity. We always ask our client or tell our clients, if they have any questions, they can certainly reach out to us. And, we have encountered some, I don't know if you want to call it resistance, but okay, are you sure this is an issue? Because on this page, we didn't see that happen. Just different things like that we always respond by, appropriate documentation or just explaining how we tested a particular item where the issue arose from. So
awesome. All right, well, we are getting close to time, so I want to make sure that we get this final chunk of knowledge in. I want to squeeze every ounce of knowledge I can out of you guys before we let you go. So I'm going to be a little bit selfish and throw this out there for you guys. And I'm going to start with Graham. We're going to start with you. And then, as Graham answers and you guys have anything to add, just feel free to jump in and add it. And if not, then I'll get you guys each individually. But I'm going to preface this by saying, without revealing any sensitive information or preparatory stuff, right? Can you share a project where you've encountered accessibility challenges due to global differences amongst the teams involved? And like, what do you feel were the main causes of that accessibility challenge? And were you able to solve or work through those challenges? And if you don't have one, it's okay as well. I'm going to start with that one, Graham.
Yeah, I struggle to think of a good example for this one, especially that you're looking for an answer that's sort of globally, global differences. Yes, there have been, with every project, there's a challenge. And I think the biggest challenge that I'm finding now with every project is really educating the prospect or the client now who's on board as to the amount of work that we need to put in from an accessibility standpoint. And actually we had a great meeting yesterday, Kosi and Jerson and I, just about the Desert Wing site and how we need to hold our hands up and say, I built that a few years ago and it's not accessible. And that's actually something that we are working on, a complete rebuild to make it so. And that living and breathing and talking the talk and walking the walk is actually, we have to embrace that. And it's one thing for us to tell our clients that, you know, we recommend it. We don't want to build a website that's not accessible, but we have to actually also follow suit. And so that's something that we are right in the midst of changing dramatically and improving. So I don't really have a particular example though of a client that I can think of to share on that one. Otherwise, sorry.
No problem at all. And again, you know, when I say global, we can frame it in the sense of, you know, it not necessarily has to be geographic. Cool. You know, the team can be made up of people from different regions, different countries, and we're going to bring those demographics to the table as we think through things. We think through culturally, you know, think through things like that. So we can also frame it. You know, we don't have to sort of frame it in the literal sense of global. Cozy, do you have anything thinking back, even to like when you were that accessibility trainer? Did you train anybody from different cultures? I was a trainer myself, and I remember having to go into different houses and encounter different cultures and train within those cultures and how the family might have treated the person. So is there any time that you might have encountered something like that where you had to sort of adapt your methods to sort of get that to get the job done?
Absolutely. I'm not going to focus on probably my experiences as I'm sorry, my experiences as a trainer, but I do know that I've worked in on global teams, and on some teams you'll find that there are some cultural differences where maybe a team member may not want to speak up, or they may be hesitant to share some of their input, but they have a lot of great ideas and a lot of really good feedback. So finding ways to bring everybody to the table. I find that you have to be you have to be open minded, and probably it kind of changed the way I worked, you know, led meetings. I had a few people on one of my teams, and they just didn't really want to speak up that much. So just engaging with them on the side and getting some of their input, I think that really helped.
That's awesome, because one of my follow-ups is going to be, how did you adapt, or what kind of adaptations did you make, you know, to accomplish that? And you answered it. So awesome. Jerson, have you encountered a project where you've encountered challenges due to global differences amongst the team?
I guess it's not strictly global differences, but more on not enough knowledge about accessibility. One particular example that I can think of was when I worked on a project and the designer has already finished the wireframe and design of the website, and I noticed that the color contrast was didn't pass the WeCo success criterion for color contrast. And so I mentioned that to the designer, who was kind of surprised that I would bring up something that's not strictly within my sort of expertise, but within theirs. So, but he was open to my suggestions, and also with the when the client realized what I was saying, then they agreed and asked the designer to revise the colors a bit to sort of still meet the branding guidelines, but also meet the color contrast of the website design.
That's awesome. And you probably saved that client a lot of time down the line. And Risk was probably very happy with you that you caught that in the design phase in the design phase. Awesome. All right. Let's see. Suan, you haven't gone yet, and I'll end with Ryan. Do you have an example of this, Suan?
I wouldn't say, I want to say my example, what comes to my mind is regarding accessibility knowledge in terms of the WCAG success criteria for the 2.1. That, and I don't know if it's dependent, it's to me, it's dependent on the position that you're in, the company or nonprofit that you're with. I don't necessarily know if it has to do with different cultures, but I know just overall accessibility knowledge, that we encounter that where from individuals from different companies or nonprofit who don't have any knowledge or very little to experts. And how we accommodate for that is that whenever we are asked to do a training for a client, we do talk to the client and say, okay, these individuals who are going to be attending this training, how much knowledge do they have? We're sure that we know our audience first before we actually create or deliver the training. We do have public free webinars that really start off with the basics to help educate those who are just learning or beginning to learn about accessibility. And then we also have our what we call our our consultations with our clients. They can range from beginner to expertise, and so we're prepared to answer all types of questions. And then in our reports, we do our very best to keep our reports in plain English as best as we can. We do use the proper internet web related terms like text box, forms, things like that. But we keep that, but we try to keep it as basic as we can, which of course there are times where you can't when you have some more technical related issues. But I think the overall, the cultural difference to me is this accessibility knowledge, and then all those examples that I gave is how we try to find a solution for that issue.
Awesome. Perfect. Yeah, I was going to say one thing before we jump over to Ryan, who I can guarantee has some examples there. I tend to find throughout my career the places that sort of where I can sort of bridge the gap between like the culture or having like issues come up with different cultures or between the countries that have strong disability laws versus the ones that don't. Here in the United States, because we have the disability laws, but it's also based around litigation. You tend to have companies that are based here sort of doing more work around making sure that they're quote unquote compliant. And then you have the ones that go beyond that, that go beyond compliance and actually are, doing it because they want their product to be accessible. In other countries you might get to that don't have accessibility laws like that, or there's no teeth behind them, you tend to have more of those pushbacks, more of those resistance towards accessibility. So Ryan, to wrap up, because we're almost at time, do you have, or can you share a project where you've encountered accessibility challenges due to global differences amongst the different teams that you're working with?
Yeah, I think I'll keep it pretty high level. I don't want to focus on any one project or call anybody out, but
right.
I think for our brand websites, we use a lot of third-party software integrations. And some examples would be, you may have gone to a website where you can shop a product and you add it to a cart. most of our websites, you're adding it to like an Instacart or an Amazon or some other retailer. That's third-party integration. You may see like ratings and reviews on a website. That's another integration. So we use a lot of integrations in addition to the applications that we design and develop internally. Our end users don't know the difference, right? They see it as one application. They think it's one owner. And it's a kind of a big deal for our team that those third-party integrations are also accessible, because we know that our end users don't know the difference. So the way that we try to work with that is we try to find who the technical contacts are for those third-party service providers. And then we do accessibility testing, and WeCo support us with some of those audits and tests. And then we deliver that feedback to the technical team. Our hope is that the technical team will be receptive to our feedback and will want to collaborate on those issues. The benefit is that if they make those updates and they make the software better, that will benefit all of their consumers that are buying their products and implementing their software on their sites, not just General Mills consumers, right?
Right.
So we see it as like, hey, we're providing you free feedback. We're collaborating with you to work through these issues with you hand in hand, and it's going to benefit all of your customers, right? There's sometimes some pushback because they have their own process for accessibility compliance, and sometimes they will dispute our findings, right? What we find valuable is then to invite them to one of our testing sessions that is hosted by WeCo. And, you know, Susan mentioned this earlier, that we will then demonstrate that issue firsthand. It's hard to dispute that issue when you see someone struggling in real time. And I think that's been very valuable, is like, if you can just get them to the meeting and demonstrate the issue firsthand, it becomes enlightening to your business partner, and then they see the value and they are more receptive to that feedback and that request for collaboration. So we try to create that sort of relationship with all of our third-party providers. Another way that we try to get ahead of it is that we work with our innovation teams to understand, like, what applications are we testing and trying to learn from. And let's then, before we sign a contract with them, let's do some testing and learning of our own to understand like how accessible the application is. And let's include that feedback as part of that decision process before we purchase. So kind of that's how we kind of work through some of those challenges.
Right. So those are some of the adaptations that you make sort of ahead of time, or when it happens, you sort of bring them in. And approach like that will definitely travel across any cultural divide or barrier that might be there, because you're actually bringing the people in that is being affected by that barrier or that defect, that bug on their products. It's a great approach, because you really can't argue in the face of that, right?
Right.
Awesome. Well, we have a little less than 5 minutes left, and I just want to first thank everyone for joining us. Thank the panelists, Graham, Cozy, Jerson, Sue-Ann, and Ryan for taking the time with us. Just want to make sure that you guys have just one minute or so, 30 seconds, so to say a quick wrap up, a quick goodbye. Any last thoughts that you may have before we call it a day and call it the end to a great GAD, Global Accessibility Awareness Day? Anybody wants to have a quick wrap up? You can have the floor. If not, we can turn it back over to Lynn.
I'll jump in real quick, keep it short. Just want to thank WeCo and everybody for joining today. Happy to be a part of this discussion. And if you have any questions for me, Lynn can provide my email to anybody who's interested. Happy to engage. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Anyone else?
If I could also just copy and paste what Ryan just said. Thank you so much for hosting and making this happen. And if you want to reach out to me or anyone in our team, we've actually got a little website that you can go to. It's airwayteam.com, and that has all of us on the team that built that site for the mobility competition. And if anyone wants to talk about that or how, feel free to reach out. We'll be delighted to keep in touch with anyone. Thank you.
Awesome. I'm definitely going to go watch your presentation from Access U.
And we'll provide that out to everyone who registered as well.
Awesome. Cozy, Tristan, or Sue Ann, you guys want to take a quick minute so some last words? You don't have
I'll
to.
go. I'll go really quick. So I'm sure Lynn would tell you and everybody else, but on behalf of WeCo, I thank everybody for attending this event. And I thank Lynn for asking me to be on this panel.
Awesome.
I would like to thank Lynn as well, and Graham as well for letting me know about this panel. This has been a great experience. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'd also like to thank Lynn and WeCo, Graham, for inviting me to this panel. It's been a really humbling experience to be here and share with everyone. Thank you.
Well, I'll just wrap up by saying that the conversation that was in the room with the speakers before we started is how accessibility has, for us at WeCo, has really become a family, and how we just met Graham and his crew maybe a month ago, and now we're already working together to raise awareness about the need for accessibility, and we're actually going to call on Graham's team for a bid for website maintenance now. But we find that accessibility really does work better if we're all working together. And that's why we've got great resources like Knowability doing wonderful web design competition. And we've got competitors that are in the room today that are here supporting us, who we want to thank as well, because that's how we're going to get there, is if we share information and we all work together. So I want to wish everybody a very, very happy Global Accessibility Awareness Day. And special thank you again to Desert Wing, General Mills, and also to Visa for loaning us Paul. And thanks so much to everybody who came. So with that, I think we'll just go ahead and call this a wrap.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you all.
Thanks so much.